The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
This is a fun part because the next hour or so we're going to be spending on some very basic rules of interface design. And the beauty of those rules is that they pretty much work any time that you design an interface. So we've seen a lot of things where you need to consider, are there experienced users or basic starters with the interface. Here we have interface design rules that basically apply in any situation that you run into. And give you a quick overview, these are the 10 rules we're going to be covering. Keeping the interface simple, speaking the user's language, being consistent and predictable, providing feedback and being responsive in the interface, minimizing the user's memory load, avoiding errors, and if errors happen, then helping to recover them and offering undo options. Designing clear exits and closed dialogues. That's a little less obvious what that means, but we'll come to it. Including help and documentation, addressing diverse user needs, and finally, hire a graphic designer. So let's jump right in. Number one, keeping the interface simple. That's the most important rule. And it sort of refers to the fact that when you do your first design, you've probably experienced this by now. In the tasks that we've given you, the assignments, you do a first interface design, and you think, oh, that's pretty good. And then you look at it closely yourself. Somebody else looks at it. Maybe you test it with users. You think about it some more. You realize some problems. Like maybe it's too complicated or too awkward or makes things unnecessarily difficult, or you need a totally different approach. So an early throw of your early idea of the interface is probably not the simplest, most elegant way of doing it. That's one reason why keeping the interface simple is important to keep in mind. The other reason is that you need to avoid feature creep. Feature creep means that features, additional things, creep into your interface, and it's kind of like in a horror movie. And why does that happen? Well, it happens on the one hand because if you ask people who are using, let's say you wrote an app, put it on the App Store, you get feedback, very few people will tell you, oh, you should remove these 3 features. A lot of people will tell you, this is great, but it should also do this because I need that. Right? And if you follow each of those requests for additional features by every single user, then it becomes this giant bloated thing. Including more features makes sense if it's of benefit to the users after all considerations. But you've got to make sure that usability doesn't go down as you add features, and that's very hard. And I don't know about you, but when I use a text editing system like Word or something, I don't use all of its features by far. The famous 80-20 rule says 80% of users or use cases only use 20% of the features of the system. So including all possible features that you might think you might need sometimes, or some user might need sometimes, will make the interface way too complicated. Wouldn't it be nice if, I was thinking this for the longest time, if sometime a CEO would step on the stage and say, the next version of Windows will have fewer features or no new features. It will just be easier to use than the old one. That'd be cool. It actually kind of happened at some point. I was very surprised. I was in a keynote introducing, I think, OS 10 Mountain Lion or one of those variants there. And Jobs stepped up and said, like, oh, and here's the number of new features for OS 10 so-and-so. And then he put a big fat 0 on the screen, and everybody was like, what? And that was the explanation. He said, well, we have a lot of stuff to clean up under the hood, and we have a lot of things in the UI to straighten out. We're not going to add features. We're just going to make this better as it is. So that's a nice goal for a change. Not to say, oh, these are the new features of version X, but actually say we improved usability. If you are pressed to improve usability, to add features, then you may have to move them out into sub-dialogues or into different modes of the interface, in the sense that not everybody has to live with them all the time. Here's an example. This is a simple Finder interface. OS X offers this. I had this challenge that my mom needed a computer, so I got her a Mac, and I looked at what she was going to do with it and asked her, what are you going to do with it, and what are your ideas? She said, yeah, writing letters, reading email, browsing the web, and that's pretty much it. And I understood after a while that actually the severely limited functionality that the so-called simple Finder from OS X offers was totally enough for her. Right? She wasn't interested in installing new apps or anything like this. So this is the interface from the simple Finder. Look at the file menu. That's the only thing you can do. This has only one window. It's a fixed size. You can't resize it. You can close it, but the only thing you can do then is open it up again. There is no double clicking. And you've probably seen this also in simple versions of the Windows Explorer also does something like that, where you have like a browser-like interface where you just single click on things to launch them. There is no dragging of files. You can't drag files around. There are no aliases or shortcuts, as they're called in Windows. There are no toolbars in this window here. If there's more stuff in here than you can do, then you can just basically go to the left and right and look at additional windows here, or content pages. No scroll bars. There is not the concept of folders. So you cannot create folders here in the Finder in order to move stuff around. You can do that from an application. When you save something, you can create a new folder there, but not from here. Or the administrator, like me in this case, could create folders for her and say, like, that's where you put all your letters, this is where you put all your whatever. You only have direct access to a specified set of applications. They end up down here in a little applications folder. And that's it, right? If you look at the real file menu here, there's like a gazillion things you can do with a file in the file menu, and they're all gone. So to a computer scientist, it's like, ooh, my God, all these limitations. I don't know whether I can live with this. But it turns out, if you actually look at what a person wants to do with the system, that might very well be enough. So I think that's a good way of limiting the interface, so it gets the universal thumb of approval. There's a problem, of course. If you do use this and applications mess with it, then the user might get into problems. For example, when I installed Office under the Simple Finder, I found that Office actually just by itself puts folders into the Documents folder of the user, which is not a nice thing to do, to be honest. That's not a place where applications should mess around and put administrative data. That's the user space. And it does that even in the Simple Finder view. So all of a sudden, there are these clean things where just my mom has her 5 letters, and then there is like Microsoft user data as a folder, which of course throws this concept somewhat out of the window because it's confusing and you can't remove that folder, but you can also not, it's just sitting there. So this has to work. Everybody has to basically play nice as an application in order to make a system like this work. And it turned out that was still the problem in 2011. Did you try this with the latest one? Didn't run. It didn't work. OK. This is an example for feature creep. I like to talk about video recorders because they're really a sad little bunch. I mean, I'm really sorry for the VCR. The VCR used to be this awesome thing, right? It was this box that you pressed a button, and then it would record what was on TV. And for your parents, this was really a cool thing to have, right, when it came out. But then everybody had a VCR. And so Panasonic or Sony, they were like, oh, damn it, everybody's got a VCR now. What are we going to do? Well, let's add programmability to it so I can tell it to record something at a later time. So they added that feature, and then everybody bought a new VCR because that's a cool feature, and people like features. They found that they were not using the programming that much, but sometimes it was useful. Still, a lot of the times they would just hit record because something cool was on that they wanted to preserve. Now everybody's got a programmable VCR. So Panasonic and Sony are like, oh, damn it, how are we going to sell more VCRs? Oh, I know. We're going to let them program them like for 255 programs in 365 days. So everybody gets a new VCR, and guess what? They find that they very rarely need the function of programming something 8 months ahead of time, and hundreds of programmings also don't happen. But it sounded like a good feature. But this is how feature creep happens, right? So more and more stuff was put into the VCR and into its user interface as a result, that it got more and more complicated to use. I think it's hilarious that shortly before VCRs died a horrible death, they introduced something called OTR. Anybody know what OTR was? One-touch recording. It was a little button that brought back the original idea of the VCR, which is just record what's going on right now. Because that had gotten so complicated with all the interface layers on top of it that you couldn't just record. It would ask you all kinds of things. So I thought it was funny, introducing a new button for the original function. So this is feature creep happening. Devices sort of keep adding features, and especially when the UI to present these features is like this. If this is all you have in order to program a start and end time and a date for some recording in the future, that's horrible. So not so great. Here's another example. Couple months ago, it's been a while now, over a year. My alarm clock broke down. So I went to MediaMarkt or Saturn or something, one of those Best Buy like computer shops, and looked at the alarm clocks, and I thought they were kidding. They were all like examples of how not to do an interface from DIS1. Right? It was terrible. They all had like tiny little buttons that all were the same. 10 buttons on there. One of them would change the time. The next one would turn on and off the alarm. The third one would, I don't know, create a nuclear meltdown. And exactly in this shape that I don't know about you guys, but when I need to set the time for the next morning, I'm usually in bed. I'm kind of tired, and I really just want to go like, I also found that all I needed, time-wise, was I needed a 15-minute interval. Like, I would set the time, and then maybe I go to bed, and I was like, oh, tomorrow I want to get up 15 minutes earlier. I don't need an alarm at like 6:37. For me, 15-minute intervals for setting the alarm would have been perfectly enough, and that wasn't something they offered. Instead, there was a single button that you hold down, and then the minutes spin real fast until they go over the time you want it, and then you have to go around again, right? All when you're tired and like really just want to go to bed. So I built my own alarm clock. And the way it works is it has a little knob here that you actually turn. It's like a physical turning knob that has little like ratchet positions that you turn it to. And every time you turn it one way to the clockwise, the alarm time would go up by 15 minutes. You turn it back one click, it goes back by 15 minutes. So when I go to bed on Wednesday and like, oh, tomorrow I need to get up 15 minutes earlier, all I do is like reach over, go click, and I'm done. Also, a lot of these alarm clocks were indicating that your alarm was actually on by showing you a tiny little bell symbol sort of in the corner that you could only see when you would like hold it up to your eyeball. Instead, I said, well, if the alarm is on and I use a secondary display down here that is brightly lit that shows me the alarm clock, the alarm time, if it's off, guess what? It's dark, so there's no alarm time visible. And that worked much better for me. And I understand that families with 5 kids need a minute precise adjustment of alarm times in the morning. I didn't. So those are some of the things that I thought illustrate maybe. Of course, I love this interface because I made it myself. But that's just to illustrate. When you really look at the actual user needs, what does a person really need in an alarm clock, you can often take away a lot of the stuff that got added on as featureitis, as feature creep. Like this. This is, I should say this, I like to name them. It's the Swiss company Crealogics that makes an e-learning administration software called Evento. And clearly somebody discovered, took some cocaine and then discovered the tab function in the interface builder, right? I don't think we need to say much about this. This is clearly not keeping it simple. So those should be enough. Keeping it simple is really important. I saw one list of interface design guidelines that I loved, which was rule number 1, keep it simple. And then rule number 2 was something else. Rule number 3 was remember to keep it simple. And 4 was something else. 5 was like, hey, did you keep it simple? So I think this is really important to go back to again and again. You know, can I take away stuff? Can I clean out? Can I simplify?
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.